Okay, just ignore the fact that my hair is wet today. A little bit damp, I took a shower. We're both going to ignore that. I wanted to sit down and film a review of All Said and Done by Simone de Beauvoir. This is the last Simone de Beauvoir book that I hauled back in either late November or early December. Thank goodness I have long loan periods and the ability to renew, but I finally got through that stack of books. This is the 5th volume in de Beauvoir's series of autobiographical works. The first is Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter. The second is Prime of Life. The third, Force of Circumstance. Then her short novella, A Very Easy Death. And then this one, which was written quite late in life. It's less chronologically focused. Her earlier works are very much this happened, then this happened, very much in sequence. This is more of a collection of her thoughts. She brings together elements and themes and events from her earlier works and discusses them once again here, and she addresses some questions people had about those earlier works. She addresses things that she thought perhaps she didn't express as well, or things she got wrong. So she begins by looking at her early life once again, looking at her upbringing, at her parents, at the way she wrote about it in Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter, reflecting on her friend Zaza, and she kind of deals with the question of what if one event had completely changed the layout of her life. What if, for example, she had switched schools at an early age? She went to a private religious school. Her father wanted her to change to a different school because it would be cheaper, but she picked her mother's side and stayed at that school. And she's kind of reflecting, what if she hadn't met her best friend, Zaza? What if she had developed differently intellectually? And she comes to the conclusion that she would be more or less the same person. She would have still written. She would have still became the writer and the person that she is at this point in her life when she is writing this book. She also muses, what if she hadn't met Sartre when she did? She kind of concludes that she would have met him anyway because of their circle of friends, but perhaps they would have had a different relationship. Perhaps they would have not been lifelong partners and lifelong friends. And from this she moves on to the topic of death. She's very interested in death in old age, and she kind of makes an account of her friends and her acquaintances, the people that she's known. She discusses how she lost touch with them, where those friendships went, and in a number of cases, how they died and how she learned of their deaths. I was a little bit surprised in the way that she dealt with these, because they come across as almost episodic, as little short stories within the larger work. She'll relate how she met a person, how she lost touch, how she got back in touch, and then of course their death, what became of them. She discusses Violet Leduc, who of course is the author of La Bâtarde, translated into English, The Bastard. I reviewed her autobiographical work a month or two ago on my channel here. That was also part of my big haul from last fall. One of the most remarkable or interesting to read, perhaps the most grotesque to read, is her account of Camille. Camille was a friend of Sartre's, who she references in her earlier volumes. Camille was someone she very much admired as a young woman. She wanted to be like Camille. Camille was charismatic and intelligent. She was going to be a writer. She was going to be a playwright. But Camille goes downhill very quickly. Camille becomes undesirable, someone who Simone feels superior towards, someone who needs to be looked after by her and Sartre. when she addresses Camille in this book, Camille has become an alcoholic. She has a 6-bottle of wine a day drinking habit. She has locked herself indoors. She dresses kind of strange. She doesn't go out. She doesn't let people in. It takes you a long time of knocking to be let in, and she eventually goes out of her mind, is just drinking a lot of alcohol, and becomes malnourished and dies. Thought it was rather interesting that she chose to discuss these people's deaths in such detail. It almost seems perhaps unfair to to air these horrible deaths to her reading public. I'm just going to read you a passage about Camille. There was no sheet on the mattress, and it was black with filth. Thousands of maggots were crawling in the dustbins where Camille threw the remains of her food. She would not allow anything to be touched. At 9 in the morning she had wine sent up. She telephoned the grocer, who brought her good, expensive stuff. Since the distraint she had eaten nothing. Madame C. put food on the dining room table and called Camille. Next day she found the dishes untouched. Sometimes at night Camille could be heard singing. I don't want to say anything to the other tenants, said the concierge. People are so ill-natured, they laugh. It's more unhappiness than anything else. What might you call a kind of moral decay? She was very fond of Camille, who was such a lady and so cultivated in her lucid moments, and who talked to her so kindly and politely. I said she would have to be sent to a nursing home. And then, a little bit later on, she says, I went to the hospital the next day. The house physician was not there. The sister in charge told me that Camille was under observation for diabetes. I sent to ask whether she would like to see me. She said yes. The sister pointed vaguely to a kind of ward with 8 beds in it. I could not make out which was Camille. I eliminated several patients, such as the young and the white-haired old women, and only one remained, a dark woman with short hair and a big, shapeless face. I came nearer. She was talking to a nurse, and I recognized Camille's voice. She was wearing the regulation rough canvas nightgown. Her wrists were very thin, and her face was puffy. She apologized for her hair. They have cut it, and I haven't the strength to comb it. I asked her whether she was being properly treated. It's like prison. They won't give me the things I want. And she dies the next day or a few days later, and Simone and Sartre are left with Camille's papers, and just as they suspect, there is nothing that they feel is of literary merit. I had to ask myself why this was included at all. Certainly it's a horrible depiction of alcoholism, a horrible depiction of aging, of death, but other than the fact that this woman, Camille, meant so much to Simone de Beauvoir when she was a young woman around the age of 20, it's difficult to see why she would return to this woman later. From this discussion of death, de Beauvoir moves on to a discussion of books, of her own writing career over the past, since about 1960, to the point when this was published in the 1970s. From there, she moves on to a discussion of what she's read. There are pages and pages of kind of a literary review, literary analysis of what she read, what she thought was good, what she thought was worthy of merit. She mentions how she doesn't often feel motivated to reread because she feels as though she wants something new. She doesn't want to read based on memory. She wants to discover, but she also rereads. She mentions rereading a number of works, and after this, she moves on to film. The films that came out that she saw in theaters that she thought were of merit. From there to plays, to music. The title kind of speaks for itself. all said and done, all the things that she has said and done over her life, over the time period that this volume focuses on. From a discussion of those things, she moves on to her travels. Her travels take up a good chunk of the end of this volume, and I think she does a better job of depicting these than in the end of A Force of Circumstance. In Force of Circumstance, as I said in my review, I found her account of her travels a little bit tiring, a little bit hard to focus on. In this case, though, she depicted them very well. I got just a beautiful image of France, of Italy, of Russia, and Japan. Those are the key countries that she traveled to and spent time in over these periods. She does a very interesting comparison of Italy, of Rome. She had been in Rome 30 years earlier. She often went to Rome, and there's a lot of reflection on her part, what has changed, what hasn't, how she has changed in her interaction with the culture and the landscape. Perhaps of note, too, is her and Sartre's visits to Russia. There's one particular trip where they met Khrushchev, and Khrushchev was a little bit chilly towards them, quite chilly actually. And Simone de Beauvoir believed that it was because he had been warned by someone close to him that they were not as left as they appeared to be, or as communist as they were often depicted by others. And in the long run, Simone seems to believe that it's a good thing that they received a chilly welcome from Khrushchev, because shortly after they turned their back on Russia and decided never to go back because of human rights issues there, because of political issues. Previous to this, they had been almost optimistic about communism in Russia, optimistic about the writers there. They, of course, realized that there were issues with Stalin, with the way the country was run, but they were optimistic that with the right leadership, it could be turned around, and they were, of course, horrified as in the 40s, in the 50s, and the 60s, they realized what Russia was truly like on the inside. So as the final volume, this is where she really tries to bring everything together. I found it a little bit on the disjointed side. It wasn't, as I said, as chronological as her earlier works. It seemed that she was topic hopping. One minute she's talking about her childhood, about the death of people close to her. The next she's talking about being in Japan or about the movies she saw. They almost come across as a collection of personal essays kind of strung together into a book. And it actually isn't a bad thing, this topic hopping, as long as you go in not looking for a chronological story in that regard, then it's quite enjoyable. And although not my favorite, it was still quite good. As I'm coming to the end of her autobiographical works, I think from this perspective, having just finished this, that Prime of Life is by far my favorite autobiographical work by de Beauvoir.